I guarantee you, it's been an inspiration to all of you. In particular, the cases that have been called. And she will tell you, I will not get her thunder, but I will tell you, I have met her. She laid the foundation without her even knowing that we were listening. That foundation was built of perseverance and never giving up. The voice began with her. I didn't know nothing about it until it happened to me. That's when my ears started listening. You all listened, but it didn't resonate. No lo sentiste hasta que lo pasaste y lo sentiste en tu corazón y en tu mente. Pero mi Ziegler, Ponce Ziegler, Noemí, sin ella creer, puso el foundation para que todos nosotros luchábamos, particularmente en las causas que no han agarrado justicias. Y ustedes, madres y padres, amigos y amigas, saben quién son esas causas. Pero el creer lo comenzó 56 años de pasado. Con eso, por favor, familias y amigos, help me recognize and bring our keynote speaker, Mrs. Noemí Ponce Ziegler, to the podium.
Good evening. My name is Noemí Ponce Ziegler. I'm here to tell you my story. It is a story that spans over 30 years. A 30-year quest to find justice for a murdered victim named Irene Garza. Irene's case started on April 16, 1960. It was the evening before Easter. Irene went to confession at a local church. Witnesses saw her arrive at the church, but she was never seen leaving. Her car was found parked outside. Excuse me, I didn't know there was going to be music, so I'm going to get emotional now. Her car was parked outside the church, but Irene had vanished. 5 days later, her body was found floating in a local canal. She had been beaten. She had been viciously raped. And she had been murdered. My father, Joe Armila Ponce, was one of the original investigators in Irene's case. He was a deputy sheriff under Sheriff E.E. Vickers. I can attest to the fact that on foot or on horseback, my dad relentlessly searched for Irene. The goal was to find her safe and return her to her frantic parents. That did not happen. I was a young child when Irene went missing, but even at that age, I could feel something was dreadfully wrong. I do have some memories of that terrible time in 1960. I remember grown-ups talking in hushed tones, so we as young children could be spared details of what had happened to Irene. I remember walking into a house with my grandmother and mother and seeing a group of women surrounding a crying woman. It is hard to forget. It was a cry of a mother that had lost her child. I remember walking into my grandmother's kitchen and finding my big, strong, lawman father crying. He wiped his face with a white handkerchief. My mother stood over him saying, "Milo, you did everything you could." This scene has stayed with me all my life. I remember myself and two other children sitting on the top of the trunk of a car outside of my grandmother's home. It was nighttime. One of them said 5 words. Those 5 words sounded so final. It felt like something changed forever. Those 5 words were, "You know, Irene is dead?" I remember looking up at the night sky and in a child's innocence, asking myself, "Irene, where did you go? What star did you go to?" That scene where I walked in and saw my dad crying was later explained to me by my mother. Dad's tears were out of frustration. Dad and other investigators were asked to turn in their investigative reports in Irene's case. He did. He was convinced, he was confident the killer Irene would be arrested soon. Nothing happened. He then asked what the status of the case was. Dad was told that he had done a good job, but that his superiors were handling the case now. Soon after, the case went dormant. That was in 1960. Now we jump to 1988. I stand in a hospital room. I'm looking at my father laying in a hospital bed. It is his deathbed. He has terminal cancer. Daddy's death is near. He is weak, but he is calm. I gently asked my mom if I should call the priest to give Dad last rites. Mom thought a bit and said no. He would not want a priest called. Call the minister. My dad loved his church. He never left it. But he did change one of his worship habits. After Irene's murder, he never went to confession to a priest ever again. Dad told my mom in 1960 that it was his belief that the priest that had heard Irene's last confession had killed her. This affected my dad deeply for the rest of his life. The minister came. Dad made his peace. Dad died peacefully shortly after that. As I stood, as I stood and saw my dad die, it crossed my mind, even facing death, his conviction of never confessing to a priest again after Irene's murder still endured. Something deep inside me stirred. My aunt Erlinda de la Viña was married to my blood uncle Juan de la Viña. I called her Tia Ella. She was my favorite aunt. She was elegant. She was graceful. She was loving. She was also sister to Irene Garza's mother. The connection Irene Garza and I had was that we shared a favorite aunt. We shared relatives, but we were not blood relations. Tia Ella was the one that told me Irene's story after I asked her to. It caused her great anguish to relive the horror of when Irene was raped and murdered. I do not know why, but from the very beginning that my aunt began to tell me of what had happened to Irene, I started taking notes. Some days, with her permission, I tape recorded her. During these long talks, I realized how my dad must have felt in 1960. Irene's story was sad and tragic. I knew I had to do something, I just didn't know how to do it, or what to do for that matter. It was at my aunt's home when I first felt Irene's presence. All I can say, without a doubt, Irene's spirit guided me the entire long journey I took in seeking justice for her. My amateur quest to find Irene's killer started. I had absolutely no formal training in investigations or in journalism. I just started asking questions and writing everything down. Like my husband would say years later, the killer never had a chance. He did not know the investigator had such an inquisitive daughter. Writing everything down, I started interviewing relatives. Then I branched out to friends and acquaintances of Irene. Then I branched out to law enforcement. In between all of this, I researched archived media stories of the case at the university. We set up an email address so people could contact me. It was justiceforirene@aol.com. I wrote letters to the newspapers bringing attention to her case. I made one room at my home into an office exclusively for Irene's info. Slowly, the story of what happened to Irene started coming together. Was it all smooth sailing? No, far from it. From the beginning, people did not get my motive for looking into Irene's case. My sole purpose from beginning to end was finding Irene's killer. If the killer was still on earth, I was going to find that killer. I got ran out, cursed at, laughed at, and even one time got spit at, but I kept going forward. Some people thought I was attacking the church. I never have, and I never will. It did not matter if the killer was a priest, a teacher, a policeman, or anything else for that matter. If he was a killer, I was going to find him. I started making headway, and in the early 2000s, found other people looking into Irene's case. I finally did not feel alone. One of my greatest obstacles in taking Irene's case forward was Rene Guerra, our past DA. I fought him for years because he plain did not want Irene's case to go to trial. He wanted the facts of her murder to remain buried with her. For what reasons, I never understood, and I never found out why. I never understood why, when asked about Irene's case, he replied, "Who cares? She died, the killer got away." That hurt, by the way, that hurt deeply. So we prayed for a miracle. We got one. The miracle's name was Ricardo Rodriguez. He listened. Ricardo listened. He showed respect and compassion. When he won and took office, his team thoroughly looked into Irene's case. There was, after all, there was enough evidence to present the case to the grand jury, and an indictment, an arrest, a verdict, and a sentence followed. I am happy to report, after 57 years, after Irene was raped and murdered, her killer was found guilty by trial. Her killer was the priest that heard her last confession, John B. Fight. He was given a life sentence. My dad was right all along. I made many friends along my long journey. Here are some. Retired detective from the McAllen Police Department, Sonny Miller. He was very dedicated to the rule of law. We spent many hours discussing Irene's case. McAllen Police Chief Victor Rodriguez, always compassionate, professional, and patient. Poor man. I could almost feel his eyes rolling and him saying, "Oh no, here she comes again." But he didn't. He was respectful and he listened. Retired Texas Ranger Rudy Jaramillo, a true Texas lawman, a true gentleman with high integrity. He put up with me asking a million questions. Ricardo Rodriguez, a true leader. He listens and then he acts. He is an honest and humble man. Michael J. Garza, brilliant and powerful. He was lead prosecutor in Irene's case. He is destined for greatness. What happened here was that a perfect storm formed, a perfect storm of truth. People had had enough. They no longer wanted to look away. They stood up, they stood united, and said no more. Together, all of us, brought justice for Irene. We stood firm and gave Irene her day in court. We stood together and took care of one of our own. And we will do it again, again, and again. I thank everyone that stood up for Irene. Because of you, she rests in peace now. For the families and friends that are fighting to find justice, I humbly leave you with this advice.